And I am Jordan. Today we will be discussing the year 1912.
What are you going to be talking about today, Jordan?
Today, I'll be discussing the rise and fall of the RMS Titanic.
Ooh.
So I'm sure most people know the story. James Cameron got it right with the movie Titanic. Historically, pretty much everyone's familiar with it. So I'm going to talk about the series of events that happened, followed by some of the survivor stories. So, in the beginning, the RMS Titanic, a luxury steamship, sank in the early morning of April 15th, 1912, off the coast of Newfoundland in the Atlantic after sideswiping an iceberg during its maiden voyage. Of the 2,240 passengers and crew on board, more than 15,000 lost their lives in the disaster. The Titanic was the product of the intense competition among rival shipping lines in the first half of the 20th century. In particular, the White Star Line found itself in a battle for steamship primacy. Heard that one before? Steamship primacy is a thing.
I've never heard that before.
With Cunard, a vulnerable British firm with two stand-out ships that ranked among the most sophisticated and luxurious of their time. So Cunard's Mauretania began service in 1907 and quickly set a speed record for the fastest average speed during the transatlantic crossing, which was about 23.69 knots or 27.26 miles per hour, a title that held for 22 years fastest boat. So Cunard's other masterpiece, Lusitania, launched the same year and was admired for its spectacular interiors. So a lot more luxurious. And it met its tragic end on May 7th, 1915, when a torpedo fired by a German U-boat sunk the ship, killing 1,200 people of the 1,959 people on board, and participating in the United States' entry into World War I.
Oh, that was World War I.
Yeah.
You know, just a tidbit, I think there was a French soldier who's just about to kill a German soldier during World War I, but he kind of felt bad for him and let him go. And guess who the German soldier was?
Oscar Schindler?
Yeah, it was Hitler.
Really?
Yeah.
That seemed too obvious.
I wonder how that French soldier felt afterwards.
Whoa. Wait, when was that?
During World War I.
Whoa. That is insane.
Yeah, that's crazy, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that was really... That's very interesting. I never knew that. But did you know passengers traveling first class on Titanic were roughly about 44% more likely to survive than the other passengers?
I'm sorry, say that again?
So the passengers traveling first class were definitely like 44% more likely to survive than all the other passengers.
How's that?
Well, because they treated first class, like even during a disaster. They got to go in the lifeboats first and all that.
Oh.
Yeah, another little tidbit. So that same year that Cunard unveiled the two magnificent liners, J. Bruce Ismay, chief executive of White Star, discussed the construction of 3 large ships with William J. Peary, I should say, chairman of the shipbuilding company Harland and Wolff. It's a big name in this story. Part of the Olympic class of liners, each ship would measure 882 feet in length and 92.5 feet at the broadest point of them, making it the largest of their time. So in March 1909, work began on the massive Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland, on the second of these 3 ocean liners, Titanic, and continued non-stop for 2 years. So that's when they began building the Titanic. On May 31st, 1911, the Titanic was the largest moving man-made object in the world at the time.
Wow.
So bigger than blimps and any other ship you can think of. And it made its way down the slipways into the River Lagan in Belfast. More than 10,000 people attended the launching, which took just over a minute before it was on its way. So I always think about that. Like, there's a couple of times I went to Galveston, you see those cruise ships go, and there's nobody there like waving people away. They don't care. But I want to get a top hat one day and a suit and a briefcase and just wave at the ships as they leave. That's one of my short-term goals. We're going to do that. We're going to make a trip and record it.
Okay.
So the hull, you know what the hull is?
Tell me.
The hull of the ship is like the bottom and the side. So it's like the part that touches the water, pretty much.
Oh, okay.
The outside of the thing. So the hull was immediately towed into the mammoth fitting out dock, where thousands of workers would spend most of the next year building the ship's decks. So they pretty much have to build the hull, and then they move it, and then, because if they make it too big, they won't be able to get into the water. So it's interesting how they built it. They built like the hull, put it into the water, and then continued building it.
On top of that.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
So imagine that, like how heavy that thing must be. And it's steel. It's a heavy metal ship. So once they got into the water, then they create all the lavish interiors, and they installed 29 giant boilers that would power the 2 main steam engines. So now we're going to talk about the flaws, right? The unsinkable, quote unquote, Titanic, because that's what it was quoted at. Like God himself can't sink this ship. They quoted, you've heard the stories.
Like the Air Quad Theater was completely fireproof.
It's fireproof. Well, this is the unsinkable Titanic, right? Now, according to some hypothesis, Titanic was doomed from the start by a design that was praised to be state-of-the-art. The Olympic-class ships featured a double bottom and 15 watertight bulkhead compartments. So pretty much if water leaked in it, they seal it off. Mm-hmm. So this was meant to be foolproof, but you got to put it to the test, of course. So they had these even back then, electric watertight doors. They'd be operated individually or simultaneously by a switch on the bridge. So one person can control all that. Mm-hmm. Close those doors. So if there were to be punctured on the side, they can close off these doors. But the watertight compartment design contained a flaw that was a critical factor in Titanic sinking. While the individual bulkheads were indeed watertight, the walls separating the bulkheads extended only a few feet above the waterline. So water would pour from one compartment into another, especially if the ship began to list or pitch forward. Now, pitch, that means like to move, like tilt.
Yeah.
Yes. And also to accommodate space for the people on the upper floors. So you got the third class at the bottom, right? First class at the top. Mm-hmm. So there's more room on top. So one of their errors were these compartments that they sealed off were still below the waterline. So if they would have just raised it above the waterline, that would have helped a lot. But it doesn't help when, it can still get in through above the waterline.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
So that was one of the biggest errors. But they did that to accommodate more space for the people paying more, the first and second class. Second critical safety lapse that contributed to the loss of so many lives was the inadequate number of lifeboats carried on Titanic. Do you know about that?
Yeah, didn't they talk about that in the movie?
They do, yeah.
Billy Zane gets on the lifeboat.
Yeah.
Like a coward.
Yeah, and it's because he had it, I think, planned for him. He's rich, of course. But it was meant to be only women and children. And I'll get into that in just a minute. But so, yes, they only had 16 lifeboats, plus the Engelhart collapsibles. They had 4 of those, right? So those were ones that you can just put together, emergency boats. And that would accommodate just altogether 1,178 people. You got over 2,200 people on board. So the Titanic would carry up to 2,435 passengers, maximum. And a crew of approximately 900 brought the capacity to 3,300. But you've only got less than half of that. The reason was, it was passed by the British Board of Trade's requirements because they said, we're going to make multiple trips. There could be another rescue ship there. We're going to get all these people to the rescue ship and then come back to get the second batch of people. So that was their way that they got it passed, which was completely legal. Mm-hmm. They didn't do anything wrong. It was completely passed. So as a result, even if lifeboats were loaded to full capacity during emergency rotation, there were available seats for only 1/3 of these people on board. So the Titanic created a stir when it departed for its maiden voyage. Maiden voyage means it's virgin voyage.
Okay.
That's what it means. I looked it up just to make sure.
By your face.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so it's a very first voyage. So that's what that means. I had to be clear on that. So it made its maiden voyage from Southampton, England on April 10th, 1912. After its stop in Cherbourg, France, and Queenstown, now known as Cobh, Ireland, the ship set sail for New York with 2,240 passengers and crew, or souls as they like to call them. Have you heard that term?
Yeah, I have.
It was on that crappy Tom Hanks movie.
Which one?
The one on Apple TV about the ships.
I don't know.
It was a good story, but it was boring. But I hear it a lot on planes. They say souls. Mm-hmm. I hear pilots say that. So souls, what that means is now passengers are how many occupy the seats. So say you got like a box and you buy a seat for that box. Well, that's a passenger. Mm-hmm. A soul is an actual human on board. So you can have 500 passengers and 450 souls. It just means those seats are occupied for whatever. Or some person wants their privacy and doesn't want people sitting next to them. They'll buy all 3 seats on a plane so they can sit by themselves. Things like that. So that's why they have it different with passengers and souls. Anyway, okay, so one person was supposed to be on the Titanic that wasn't was J.P. Morgan. You want to say something?
I have a conspiracy.
Come on, hear it. Let's hear it.
Okay. So, one of the conspiracies is that J.P. Morgan planned the disaster to kill his rivals.
Whoa.
Because there was 2 people on there named, I don't know their first names, it's Astor and Guggenheim. They were on there and they actually died. And they were opposed to the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank. And a lot of people think the Federal Reserve is a government entity, but it's not. It's privately owned. And supposedly those 2 people were opposed to its creation and JP Morgan wanted it to happen. So I don't know how he would have made it go into an iceberg, but that's the conspiracy.
Well, maybe he rushed them because they were at full throttle going across the Atlantic and blinded, completely blind. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what I think of that. How I feel about that.
It's just a conspiracy I read. I've always thought like, oh, that's crazy. But,
I mean, it's definitely lucky, right?
No evidence for it, but
he definitely got lucky from it. He profited from it, I'm assuming.
Oh, yeah.
We still talk about him now.
Mm-hmm.
So he was supposed to go on the Titanic. So J.P. Morgan, whose International Mercantile Marine Shipping Trust controlled White Star Line. That's the company that created Titanic, Britannic, Olympic, and he had selected Ismay, the guy I mentioned earlier, as a company officer. J.P. Morgan had planned to join his associates on Titanic, but canceled last minute when some business matters delayed him. How convenient. That kind of like plays into your conspiracy.
Yeah.
So the wealthiest passenger on board, speaking of, was John Jacob Astor. That's the guy you just mentioned.
Oh, okay.
So he was the heir of the Astor family fortune. He made waves earlier that year by marrying an 18-year-old Madeline Taumaji Force, or Force, F-O-R-C-E, a woman 29 years younger than him, and he married her shortly after divorcing his wife. Other notable passengers included the elderly owner of Macy's, Isidore Straus.
He's part of the conspiracy. I had forgotten his name.
Really? Yeah. And his wife, Ida? Maybe not.
I don't know.
Industrious Benjamin Guggenheim.
Yeah, I just mentioned him.
And accompanied by his mistress, valet, and chauffeur, and widow, and heiress, Margaret Molly Brown.
She had all those jobs?
Yeah, that was all of her titles. Mistress, valet, chauffeur, widow, and heiress. Anyway, we'll talk more about her later.
Okay.
But she actually plays a huge part. She's actually in the Titanic movie too. And you'll see her you'll know who she is once I mention her later on. And she will earn her nickname, the Unsinkable Molly Brown. You've heard of that? No?
Is it Kathy Bates?
I think so. I think it's Kathy Bates.
They call her New Money.
Yeah. I think yes, it was. She was on the boat, right?
Yeah.
So go back. Yeah, that was Kathy Bates. So if you watch the movie Titanic, Kathy Bates plays the Unsinkable Molly Brown. And I'll talk about her later on.
Okay.
So the employees attending the first class luminaries were most traveling second class, right? So all the employees, the academics, tourists, journalists, and any other people that were like, they want benefits of the class, but can't really afford first class. Now, the second class on the Titanic was equivalent to most first class on other ships.
Okay.
So here you get a +1 first class. It's ridiculous. You've seen the movie, you see how ridiculous it's like. They have a dome glass ceiling in the ballroom. Yeah, it's ridiculous. So this was another level of luxury. But by far the largest group of passengers was the third class. They took up more than 700 of the population on that boat, exceeding 2 levels combined. So they were at the bottom 2 levels. Some had paid less than $20 to make the crossing. And it was the third class, which was a major source of the profit for the shipping lines of White Star. And the Titanic was designed to offer these passengers accommodations and amenities superior to those found in other third class of other ships in that era. So traveling third class is like I just mentioned with the first class. Second class is first class. third class or second class. It's just a better ship to be on. And affordable for third class. So Titanic's departure from Southampton on April 10th had a couple of minor problems before departure. There was a small coal fire discovered in one of the bunkers, like right when they were about to take off, which was an alarming, but it was like kind of like not that uncommon for it to happen on steamships. Mm-hmm. You know, you got too much coal, it spills out a little bit, it's a fire. So there were stokers hosing it down, trying to smolder the coil and shoveled it aside to, reach the base of the blaze. So it was a pretty big fire, but it was like, oh, it's no big deal. This ship's made of metal. We'll be fine. After assessing the situation, the captain and chief engineer concluded that it was unlikely it had caused any damage and it would affect the hull or any of the structure. So they're like, you know what? It should be good. We'll take care of it as we go. So there's a fire going before they take off and as they're taking off.
Who gave them the go-ahead to do that?
It was like, oh, it's not a big deal. This happens.
JP Morgan.
Maybe.
I'm just kidding.
I think it should have been completely extinguished before even leaving.
That would make sense.
But they've got to think about time and money. And I might explain something else later on in this. So, according to a theory put forth by a small number of Titanic experts, they said that the fire became uncontrollable as they departed Southampton, forcing the crew to go full throttle across the Atlantic Ocean to get there as quick as possible.
Because the fire was under control?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, let's just hurry up and get them there and keep this fire under control. It'll burn the whole way. And we'll figure it out as we go. We've got seawater. We'll be all right. So, they were just trying to save some time and money. And because they were going so fast, that's probably what caused them to not miss the iceberg. They probably could have missed it going the speed they were supposed to go. But they were going blind at full throttle speed. So another close call took place right before the Titanic left the Southampton dock. It got underway that it narrowly escaped a collision with the America Line's SS. Mm-hmm. So it just barely passed another ship as it was leaving. That was another little close call. It was the America Line's SS New York. That's what it was called. Superstitious Titanic buffs sometimes point to this as the worst kind of omen. Yeah. Departing on your maiden voyage, nearly hitting a ship. Probably don't finish the journey.
On fire.
Yeah, you got a burning ship on fire, nearly hits another boat. Maybe just turn back and let's try this again tomorrow. So Titanic strikes an iceberg. That's what we know about, right? So on April 14th, after 4 days of uneventful sailing, Titanic received sporadic reports of ice from other ships. So there's other ships around them saying, hey, there's a bunch of icebergs here.
Oh, so they were told.
Yeah, they knew. And they're still going full speed.
Wow. Why would they do that?
Money, I don't know. But on this particular night, there was no moon, and it was clear sky, and the seas were calm. Now, why would that matter? Because when you see waves, you can see the reflection of the waves to kind of see distance. Uh-huh. Otherwise, you're just looking into blackness.
But there was no moon.
There was no moon.
But the skies were clear.
The skies were clear. Starlight only. Moonless sky.
What was the moon?
I don't get it. I don't get that.
It's not like it just walked away.
I don't know if it was that time of year. Maybe because they're in the northern hemisphere.
Oh, maybe. I don't know.
I don't know. I read into that too. And I'm like, there's no moon, but there's stars and it's clear night. All right, cool. So all they have is starlight and still water around them. So the moonlight reflecting off the waves would give you a reference, pretty much.
Okay.
So about 11:30 p.m., a lookout saw an iceberg coming into vision. Like it was like kind of foggy, and then suddenly he could see it with his own bare naked eyes, right? There's a thing that happened, another thing that could have happened. Now, they were supposed to have binoculars, but he didn't. He didn't have access to the locker that had the binoculars.
Oh my goodness.
There's another thing that they said. There was a guy who's supposed to work at shift. He had the keys. And then they said, you know what? We got this guy going. They sent him home and replaced him with someone else. Well, the guy took the keys home with him. So in that locker that he had the keys of in Southampton, had the binoculars and some other equipment in there. They had no access to the only binoculars.
That
so
is crazy.
Having binoculars, he could have seen it. And that's what he said too. Like the same guy. Like if I just had some binoculars, I would have seen that much sooner. They could have completely steered clear of the iceberg because they saw it very last minute when it was too late, obviously. So because of this, just like in the movie, they were told to reverse the engines. That means go backwards, right? Go backwards to slow down the ship and also turn really tight to the left. Mm-hmm. And they did just that when they got note of the iceberg ahead. So the iceberg seemed to just graze alongside, and a few bits of ice fell on top of the boat. No big deal, right? That's all they felt. The people who were like on the level of it, they just felt a vibration. They knew something happened, but no big deal. Nothing as violent as actually what happened was felt. If that makes sense. It felt like a little rumble.
Yeah, you would think like it'd be like a crash and like you fall to the floor or something like that, but it wasn't like that.
It was more of a bad scrape, but the scrape was strong enough, of course, to tear through the metal.
Wow.
So sensing no collision, the lookouts were relieved. Like, oh, okay, you're good. We passed it. Good. You barely scraped it, but we're fine. They had no idea that an iceberg that had jagged underwater spurs, which slashed a 300-foot gash in the hull of the ship's waterline. So 300 feet of just tearing it up.
Wow.
So by the time the captain checked and inspected the damaged area with Harlan and Wolf's Thomas Andrews, the 5 compartments were already filling with seawater. Now remember, we talked about that before. The bow of the ship was alarmingly pitched downwards, allowing seawater to pour into the bulkhead into the neighboring compartments. So remember I told you before, like, they set it below the sea level?
Well, at least it got rid of the fire.
Probably. Where was the fire? Was it on the top, bottom? I think it would be in the basement somewhere. I don't know. Well, Andrews did a quick calculation and estimated that the Titanic might remain afloat for an hour and a half, perhaps slightly more. At that point, the captain, who had already instructed his wireless operator to call for help, ordered the lifeboats to be loaded. First thing, they're saying, you know what, we need to keep this on the down low, but let all the first class people know distinctively to get on the lifeboats because we might sink in about an hour and a half. So a little more than an hour after contact with the iceberg, a very disorganized and unrehearsed evacuation began with the lowering of the first lifeboat. The craft was designed to hold 65 people. It left with 28.
That is
on board.
BS.
Yeah. And they were saying, like, just women and children. It's like in the movie, too. Just women and children.
But why didn't they load more?
Because they're just trying to get it out. I don't know. Nothing makes sense. This whole thing is a mess. It's like nothing makes sense here. So it's meant to hold 65. Now, there were men, right? There were men that were available. Those 28 were the only ones available, but they were all women and children. Mm-hmm. Someone ordered him to say, load women and children first. He took it as only load women and children.
Oh.
So, we got all the women and children. Everyone else are men. So, wait for the next lifeboat. I've been told this by my superior. So, with 28 women and children on board, they departed that boat and left all those other men. Sexist.
Yep.
So tragically, this was to be the norm. During the confusion and chaos during the previous hours, Titanic plunged into the sea. Nearly every lifeboat would be launched, underfilled, not to the capacity, and some with only a handful of passengers. So that just seemed to be the thing. And if you remember the movie...
What is wrong with them?
Remember the movie with the guy with the gun, and he shot that guy who was trying to get onto the lifeboat, and then he shot himself in the head? Spoiler alert, but it's been, 20 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because I watched that movie for the first and only time in 1999. And I hated it then. And I hated it because of all the hype with Leo DiCaprio.
Kate Winslet.
Well, it wasn't just that. I have to say that I was kind of biased towards it too because my girlfriend at the time was a big fan of Leo DiCaprio. And I was like, rolling my eyes. Like, I don't want to see this fucking movie. And I remember watching it at her house. And it was VHS, of course. So we watched all of it, and I thought the movie was nearly ending, and then it said, please go to tape 2. I'm like, what the hell? Like, it's already an hour and a half gone by. But there was another tape? How long do you have a tape? So I was annoyed. So I was very biased, and I was like, just a different person. I watched it recently, a couple of weeks ago, and I got a different perspective of it. I'm like, wow, because I did the research first, and then watched the movie. So all the things I'm talking about, I saw in the movie. I'm like, oh, wow, that's the unsinkable Molly Brown. That's the man that went down with the ship. That's the two, the couple that slept in their bed. Yeah, that all really happened. And I'll tell you about that later. Just a little bit of tidbit, as you call it. That's not a tidbit, is it?
What's a tidbit? It's a tidbit. You're always saying trivia.
Well, yeah, trivial information. Anyway.
I thought you meant it like for
like
Trivia
games?
Pursuit.
No, like trivia. Like here's trivial information. Like it's not. It's just something you know. Like here's what I did. So after watching it from 1999 and again in 2020, I see it completely differently. I appreciate the movie much more. I'm like, wow, this is a really good movie. Whereas before, it's just a romantic movie that, you know, did really well in Japan and all over the world. It was the highest grossing movie until Avatar. Until James Cameron made another movie.
And then Avengers.
That's right. The first one, right? I don't know. It doesn't matter.
The second one.
Second Avengers?
I think so. I don't know.
Someone will fact check us. All right. So where was I? So in compliance with the law of sea, women and children boarded the boats first, like I said, and only when there were no women and children nearby, men were permitted to board. Well, many of the victims were in fact women and children because they didn't know about the lifeboats. They're still sleeping in their bed. They're still wandering about like nothing's going on. A lot of second and third class people there were women and children there too. They never knew about this. So they took care of the first class first. So it was all first class women and children, then some first class men, and then maybe some second class women and children, and then everyone else you're on your own. It was just so, they didn't prepare for this at all. So arrogant about
it being unsinkable.
Yes. Just take the lifeboats off now. We don't even need them. Leave us one, just in case we need to get food or something. Or stop it off an island. So like I said, Andrew's prediction of the Titanic staying afloat for about an hour and a half, well, he was wrong, but it was a good thing because the Titanic stayed afloat for about 3 hours. So those hours witnessed like lots of acts of cowardice and bravery. You got to see what people really like during those hours. Now, hundreds of human dramas unfolded between the order of how to load the boats right before the final plunge. Like men saw off their wives and all that. They're like men like putting their wives and kids on boats and having to watch them just float away. And that's just the way it was. And so in the end, 706 people survived the sinking of the Titanic.
How many?
706.
Out of what, 3,000 plus?
2,200 plus.
But including the crew?
It was 900. Well, no, I'm sorry. Earlier I mentioned the capacity. On this one, there was about 2,240.
Oh, okay.
I would mention the capacity earlier, so that was a different number. They didn't fill the full capacity on this trip.
So no poor people survived?
Poor people?
The third class?
Not many. It was a lot like what you saw in the movie Titanic. The first class getting on first, and then just groups of people trying to get on, but not being able to get on. And I'll get to that in just a moment. So Thomas Andrews, Titanic's chief designer, was last seen in the first class smoking room staring blankly at a painting of a ship on the wall. This scene was also in Titanic. I don't know if you remember that scene where the boat was tilted and I think it was Jack and Kate running into that room and they saw the man, they spoke with him, and then the glass kind of fell off the fireplace thing and it was showing that the boat was tilting more.
Yeah, I remember.
And yeah, that was him. Astor sent his wife Madeline into a lifeboat and telling them that she was pregnant. And he asked if he could accompany her. Like, oh, me and my pregnant wife. Well, he was denied and managed to give her a goodbye kiss just before the boat was lowered away. That was Astor, that other famous...
millionaire.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, the other one, Isidore Strauss, was offered a seat on account of his age, but refused any special consideration. Ah.
How noble.
And his wife, Ida, would not leave her husband behind. The couple waited in the cabin and would be perished together. Remember that scene from Titanic when they're laying in the bed?
And they're holding each other?
And there's flooding and there's crying and yeah, that's them.
I wouldn't leave without my husband either.
I understand that. Your life is over, right?
Or I'll pull somebody off the boat so he could get on.
Yeah. Or unhinge a door. Why not do that? Unhinge a door and just use that as a flotation device.
I'll keep that in mind next time I'm on a sinking boat.
Make sure there's room for two. Benjamin Guggenheim and his valet returned to their rooms and changed into a formal evening dress. Do you remember that scene?
Vaguely.
They're at the top of the stairs and it was like they're passing out the life belts, as they call them. Mm-hmm. Life vests, but they call them life belts. And he was like, no, I'm wearing this formal attire. And he was famous for saying, we're dressed in our best and prepared to go down like gentlemen. Remember that? It was his two men?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they were in the movie. Unsinkable Molly Brown. She helped load the boats and finally was forced into one of the last ones to leave.
There's a conspiracy regarding her.
You want to talk about that?
It's probably the most silliest one.
All right, let me hear about it.
Okay. They said that the Titanic sank because Margaret Brown was carrying Egyptian artifacts with her. So it was a mummy curse.
What?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, there's a lot to her, and I'll talk about her even more later on. So she implored its crewmen to turn back for the survivors. Remember that? She's like, hey, go back. There's more people over there. And the other guy threatened her. And remember, he was like, oh, yeah, if we go back there, they're all going to swarm us, and all of us are going to die.
I remember that,
Yeah. Well, that was Molly Brown.
Was she somebody's mistress?
I believe so. Yeah, I mentioned that earlier, remember?
Yeah.
She had all those titles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay.
So at this point, Titanic was nearly perpendicular. That's when, that famous scene.
Mm-hmm.
And the lights were still on as it was going down, so it was a very surreal sight for the people in the lifeboats. Probably more so for the people on the Titanic. Well, it finally sunk beneath the ocean's surface around 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, 1912. Throughout the morning, Cunard's Carpathia, after receiving Titanic's distress call at midnight and streaming at full speed while dodging ice floes all night, rounded up all of the lifeboats. So in the movie, that boat that they're on, remember they get to another boat?
Yeah.
Well, that contained 705 survivors. There's that scene where, Kate Winslet, Rose, saw her fiancé and oh no.
And she
there he
hid
is.
from
Yeah,
him.
and she hid from him. That was on that boat. So at least 5 separate boards of inquiry on both sides of the Atlantic conducted the comprehensive hearings on the Titanic sinking, interviewing dozens of witnesses and consulting with many maritime experts. Every conceivable subject was investigated, from the conduct of the officers and crew to the construction of the ship. Titanic conspiracy theories are still amok.
Yep, and I'm spreading them.
Now, I'd like to talk about some of the survivors.
Mm-hmm.
I want to start with the unsinkable Molly Brown. So Margaret Brown, famously known as the unsinkable Molly Brown, after she survived the wreck of the Titanic, earned that name, effectively taking over one of the ship's lifeboats and threatening to throw the quartermaster overboard. That's that guy.
Mm-hmm.
Her mission was turn back and look for more survivors, like I mentioned earlier. She grew up poor and chose to marry for love. Not many people do that. A decision she thought was likely to keep her poor for the rest of her life. But her husband beat odds and did well in life, and with their newfound wealth, she became a traveler, socialite, philanthropist who was never afraid to roll up her sleeves and get to work. So probably what you said is true. She was on the Titanic because it was the fastest available transport to the United States, where a sick grandchild had caused her to cut short her travels in Egypt. Because she was in Egypt before that.
Oh, okay.
So when the ship sank, she fought to get as many passengers into the lifeboats as she could, and she even took the oar herself to help steer.
Wow.
She publicly campaigned for women's rights and education for the poor. She even ran for the Senate in 1914, a campaign she only halted when World War I intervened. She went to help rebuild France instead. So Molly Brown's remarkable story gave us both a Broadway musical and a film adaptation of her life.
Oh, wow.
Now I'm going to talk about the Navratil orphans. The dramatic divorce and scandal brought young children, Mikhail and Edmund Navratil, onto the Titanic in 1912. They were accompanied on the voyage by their father, Mikhail Navratil Sr., who recently separated from their mother, Marcel Coretto. Marcel, who had won custody of the children, but she allowed them to visit Mikhail over the Easter holiday. So what does he do? Takes the kids and takes them to the United States.
Oh, on the Titanic?
Yeah.
Well, duh, right?
So she had no idea where her kids were or where her ex-husband was. So Mikhail, believing that his wife's infidelity made her unsuitable to be a guardian, decided to use that weekend to relocate his children to the United States. He bought second-class tickets on the Titanic and boarded the ship, introducing himself to fellow passengers as widower Louis M Hoffman. No P. I nearly said a P for some reason. Louis M Hoffman, a man traveling with his sons, Lolo and Mommen. He made up names. Like, oh, you could be Lolo, you could be Mommen. What? What language is that? He's just making up stuff. So he did that to get away from his crazy wife that cheated on him or something. I don't know. He's probably crazy himself, obviously. On the night the Titanic struck the iceberg, Navratil was able to get the boys aboard a lifeboat. The very last lifeboat to leave the ship, actually. So although Mikhail Jr., who's only 3 at the time, he remembered that traumatic experience, of course. And his father gave him the final message, quote unquote, "My child, when your mother comes for you, as she surely will, tell her, I loved her dearly and still do. Tell her I expected her to follow us so we might all live happily together in peace and freedom of the new world. Bullshit.
Yeah.
He's like, oh no, what's she going to think of me? People really cared about what people thought of them right before they died.
Do.
Yeah, sometimes. I don't care. Whatever I said or did, oh well. So these two children, they didn't speak English. And they were in serious trouble in New York because, of course, there's a French-speaking children. Not going to get around very much. So, luckily enough, there was a friendly French-speaking woman who also survived the wreck. She cared for them temporarily. So the publicity surrounding Titanic sinking is what saved them, because their photographs appeared in the newspapers all around the world, and their mother, who's home in France, saw the two sons in the newspaper, and like, oh, those are my kids. I wonder where they went.
Yeah.
She had no idea they were even on the Titanic.
That is scary.
Yeah. So on May 16th, more than a month after the ship sank, she reunited with them. Let me talk to you about Melvina. So Eliza Gladys Dean, aka Melvina, was not only the youngest passenger on board the Titanic when it sank, but the last living person to have survived the disaster. When the ship went down April 1912, she was only 2 months old.
Oh, wow.
So Melvina and her family never intended to board the Titanic in the first place. They had initially booked passage to the United States on another ship, but a strike forced them on the luxury one instead. So there was a strike going on the other boat, so they're like, well, we have to go still, so let's just go over there. You weren't even supposed to be on that boat. Ship, sorry. They were third-class passengers, and because they were emigrating to Kansas, everything they owned was in their luggage. So they brought everything with them. It was Melvina's father who saved them. They'd been on deck at the time of the collision, and he knew something was wrong, and he rushed to help his wife dress the children and get them off the deck. Their quick thinking saved their lives.
Mm-hmm.
As third-class passengers, they were at a disadvantage, but Melvina and her brother and her mother got on board because there was women and children first. So even though they're third class, he kind of sensed something was going on, saw the boat, like, hey, get on the boat. I can't get on, but you guys can. So after that, there seemed to be very little point in going to Kansas. So the shattered family joined a number of the other heartbroken Titanic survivors aboard the RMS Adriatic, bound for England. So Melvina became a minor celebrity. She's like the symbol of hope. Other survivors were pleased to see that the baby was saved and survived. She received countless invitations and interviews, conventions, commemorating events, and Melvina died in 2009, and her ashes were scattered at the docks of Southampton, where the ship sailed. Now, there's another unsinkable lady who has a story. Miss Unsinkable. There's Unsinkable Molly Brown and Miss Unsinkable. It's like a contest. Violet Jessup. When the Titanic was built, it was one of the 3 massive celebrated passenger ships, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of which encountered disaster on high seas. One, the Britannic, suffered an explosion and sank in 1916. She was on that. The other, the Olympic, was involved in 2 devastating collisions, but managed to stay afloat. She was on that too. So every time there was a huge disaster, she was on that boat.
Wow.
I keep saying boat. I should say ship. I might offend somebody.
Yeah, you're going to get hate now.
So it's not a boat.
From sailors.
You know how many people died? And one woman, Violet Jessup, was unlucky enough to have been on board all 3 ships, and she was an ocean liner stewardess. By the time the Titanic struck the iceberg on April 14th, 1912, Jessup had already survived 1 near-fatal accident at sea. Is she lucky or unlucky? I don't know.
That's a good question. I don't know.
So she was on lifeboat number 16, and as the boat was being lowered into the water, one of the officers gave Jessup a baby to look after. After that long night in the ocean, both she and the baby made it onto the rescue ship, where a woman, presumably was the baby's mother, grabbed the child and ran off, not saying a word. Jessup retired from her maritime career in 1950 with the nickname Miss Unsinkable. She died in 1971 at the age of 83.
Wow.
Now I'm going to talk about another man, Masabami Hasano. He's the only Japanese man on board the Titanic, and he would receive a lot of hate from his own people, his countrymen, for taking a spot on the lifeboat and not going down with the ship.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I could see that.
It's Japanese culture.
Yes.
At the time of the collision, Hasano was asleep in his cabin. He woke to a frantic knock on the door and the sound of footsteps in the hallway. He would later write that the scene outside the cabin was terrifying and chaotic. Passengers scurried back and forth as white flashes exploded above him. The crew was setting off emergency flares. When he arrived at the lifeboat, he was turned away. He was a foreigner, the officer said, and would have to wait on the lower deck. But when the man turned his back, Hasano saw his chance and jumped on a lifeboat.
I would have done the same.
And he said it had room for 2 more passengers after that too. After watching another man hop in, so he saw like there's other people doing it, I'm just going to do it too. So he wrestled with himself, do I do it? And he made the decision, just do what everyone else is doing. Jump on it as it's being lowered. He felt like he should go down the ship, but he wanted more than anything to see his wife and children again. It's a tough one. I think I would have done the same thing too.
Yeah.
So after making it back to the land, Hasano reportedly lost his government job, suffered ridicule in the press, and served as a source of shame for his family even after his death in 1997.
Oh my god, still?
Yeah. Never got a break. I've got one more for you. Lucille Carter boarded the Titanic with her husband, her children, a small group of servants, and her husband's car. This is the 25 horsepower Reno car that was seen in Titanic. Remember the one Jack and Rose had sex in?
Yeah.
That's her car.
Oof.
Despite her aristocratic upbringing, Lucille wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty, 2 women now, and help lead one of the lifeboats to safety. Quote unquote, when I went over the side with my children and got in the boat, there was no semen on it. It's usually a good thing. She later said, there was nothing else for me to do but take an oar. Wow, she's got some competition.
Mm-hmm.
While Lucille emerged from the tragedy a hero, her husband William Carter wasn't so lucky. Though Lucille originally claimed that her husband had led her and her children to the lifeboats before going off to wait stoically with the other men, the truth came out in the divorce papers 2 years later. William had warned his wife and children that the ship was going down and disappeared, only to reappear the following day on the Carpathia. I don't know how you say that. Carpathia or Carapatia? Carapatia? The rescue boat.
Okay.
So
the rescue ship.
He had them believe like, I went down with the ship and I'm a hero, but he actually snuck onto another boat and left. I think this is a character that Rose's fiance is based off of, because he did a very similar thing.
Yeah.
When Lucille boarded the rescue ship, William was already there. He greeted his wife with a cheery salutation. According to Lucille, quote unquote, all he said was that he had a jolly good breakfast and that he never thought I would make it.
Oh my god.
Doesn't it sound like the fiance of Rose?
Yeah.
I think that's where they got that scene from. But yeah, so James Cameron really got this down after doing my research and then watching the movie. And there's just so much on the story. Well, that's the only thing that ever happened in 1912.
What else happened in 1912?
January 1st, 1912. The Republic of China is established.
On January 6th, geophysicist and meteorologist Alfred Wegener presents his controversial theory of continental drift in a lecture at the Geological Association at the Sunkenberg Museum in Frankfurt.
May 5th, the Olympic Games open in Stockholm, Sweden.
On March 1st, Isabel Goodwin is appointed the first U.S. woman detective in New York City.
On January 6th, New Mexico becomes the 47th state of the United States. That's before Hawaii and Alaska, right? Last one of the mainland, right? The lower 48?
Oh, yeah.
Wait, that's 47th, so it'd be one more after that, right?
Is there?
There's 48 states. It's the 47th state. So, no, there's one that came after that in the lower 48. Then it was Alaska. Then it was Hawaii, I think. Interesting.
On March 5th, Italian forces are the first to use airships for military purposes, using them for reconnaissance behind Turkish lines.
Yeah, the Turkish war going on then, right?
That's right.
Ottoman Empire. We'll get to that soon.
Mm-hmm. All right. Don't forget to like and subscribe and rate us, and we'll see you in 1913.
Yeah. And join our Patreon. Become a patron.
That's right.
Get bonus episodes, early releases, and a smile.
Bye.
Bye.